3 people are dead, 11 are infected, 18 Americans are in quarantine. But cabin bookings for the first half of May went up by almost a third. The MV Hondius, an expedition cruise that sailed from Argentina on the 1st of April 2026, has had a hantavirus outbreak that should, by every instinct the news cycle is built on, be denting the cruise industry's biggest year in history. It is not. The Cruise Lines International Association is still forecasting a record 38 million ocean passengers this year. Viking is 92% booked. Rob Kortnick at Cornell, who has watched this industry for years, has a one-word diagnosis of why the booking data and the news cycle keep diverging: Teflon. By the end of this video, you will know the 4 reasons. Demand for cruises is unchanged despite an active hantavirus outbreak, ending with the one the news cycle keeps missing. On the 1st of April 2026, a Dutch-flagged expedition cruise ship called the MV Hondius left port in Argentina with around 150 people on board. By the time the ship was off Cape Verde in early May, 3 passengers were dead. By the time it docked in Tenerife on the 10th of May, 11 people had tested positive or presumptive positive for hantavirus. 2 of the deaths were laboratory confirmed. A third was presumptive at the time of writing. 18 returning American passengers were put into quarantine on arrival in the United States. 2 Maryland residents were monitored because they had shared a flight with an infected passenger. 6 Canadians were isolating in 3 provinces and territories, one of whom, a passenger from Yukon, came back with a presumptive positive on the Friday before this script was written. That is the story you have been seeing on the BBC, on CNN, on ABC, on The Wire from the Associated Press. By any standard reading of how the news cycle interacts with the travel industry, this should be denting cruise demand. Travel scares discount cruise stocks. Disease scares discount future bookings. People watch a cruise ship outbreak on television. They remember the helicopter footage from Yokohama in 2020, and they cancel their plans. That is not happening here. Cruise Compete is an online marketplace where consumers booking holiday cruises compare quotes from travel agents. The chief executive, Bob Levenstein, told the Associated Press this week that cabin bookings on the platform for the first half of May had gone up by almost a third year on year. He used the word categorically. "I can categorically say," he said, "that we have not seen any drop in demand." The Cruise Lines International Association, the industry trade group, is still forecasting that more than 38 million people will take an ocean-going cruise in 2026. That is 4% up on 2025, and 2025 was already the biggest year for ocean cruising on record. Viking, the Switzerland-based line, held an investor call the same week as the Hondius docking. The company told shareholders that 92% of its 2026 cruises were already booked, and 38% of its 2027 cruises were booked too. Viking did not mention hantavirus. It did not need to. Rob Kortnick, who teaches hospitality at Cornell's Nolan School and has been watching this industry for years, gave the Associated Press a one-sentence diagnosis of the gap between the news cycle and the booking data. "The cruise consumer," he said, "seems to be somewhat Teflon when it comes to stories like this." The word Teflon is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It can mean 3 different things. It can mean the customer base is reckless, it can mean the customer base is misinformed, or it can mean the customer base has noticed something about the way these stories actually unfold and about the way this particular virus actually works that the average news consumer has not. Over the next 16 minutes, the 4 reasons the customer base is making the correct call. The first reason cruise demand is unchanged is structural and almost invisible from outside the industry. Cruises are not booked the way hotel rooms are booked. They are not even booked the way airline tickets are booked. The typical cruise customer reserves a cabin 6 to 12 months before sailing. Many do so a full year in advance. By the time the cruise departs, almost everyone on board has been holding that booking long enough that any refund window closed months ago. Andrew Coggins, who teaches cruise industry analysis at Pace University's Lubin School of Business, made this point to the Associated Press in one line. "I think, if there's any impact on demand," he said, "it would be in the long term. If you're cruising in the next few months, you're past the point at which you can get your money back. What this means for the booking data is straightforward. The Cruise Compete number that Levenstein quoted, that almost a third year-on-year jump for the first half of May, is not measuring people booking the next sailing they can find. It is measuring people booking the next sailing they can plan for. People who book a cruise in May are not packing in June, they are packing in October, or in December, or for next spring. As Kortnick put it, people who are booking cruises tomorrow are thinking about the holidays. The Hondius outbreak became public knowledge in early May. The booking data Levenstein referenced was for the first half of May. Most of those bookings, almost by definition, are for cruises departing well after the Hondius story will have left the news cycle. The cruise consumer is making a calculation about risk in November. In February and May of next year, the cruise consumer is not making a calculation about risk this week. There's a follow-up question this answer does not address. What about the people sailing this week? What about the ones who have not yet boarded but are due to embark in the next 2 weeks? The Coggins answer applies here too. They are past the refund window. Their money is committed. Canceling would mean eating the cost of the trip. For the kind of trip a cruise represents, an integrated holiday with food and lodging and entertainment all in the fare, that is not a trivial sum to walk away from. There is also a second-order effect that is harder to measure. People who have already paid for a cruise and are about to take it are not the audience that cancels. They are the audience that rationalizes. The trip is booked. The news is bad. The natural human response is not to lose the money. The natural human response is to construct a reason. The news does not apply to them. It was an expedition ship. It was a different ocean. They were exposed on shore in Argentina, not on the ship. Each of those rationalizations is, in fact, accurate, but they are easier to reach when the alternative is forfeiting a holiday. So the first reason is mechanical. Cruise demand is unchanged in the short term because cruise demand cannot move in the short term. The bookings being measured this week are the bookings for the holidays beyond next quarter. The passengers being affected by the news this week are the ones who already paid. Nothing in the booking data so far has had time to register a downstream effect. But that explanation has a limit. It accounts for the inertia. It does not account for why the forward-looking demand, the bookings for 2027 that Viking is already reporting, is also unaffected. To explain that, you have to look at who is actually buying cruises. The cruise market is not the general travel market. It is not even close. The customer base skews heavily towards people who have been on multiple previous cruises. Industry surveys consistently show that repeat cruisers, people on their 4th, 6th, 8th holiday at sea, account for the majority of bookings. First-time cruisers are a real and growing slice of the demographic, but they are a minority slice. Most of the money flowing into the cruise industry on any given week is flowing from people who have already done this before. That detail matters because experienced cruisers have already lived through what disease outbreaks at sea actually look like and what they do not look like. Jenny Fielding, who runs a blog and a social media account under the name Cruise Mummy, told the Associated Press this week that she has 8 cruises booked and intends to book another. Cruising is as safe as any other type of holiday, she said, provided travelers follow sensible health advice and stay aware of official guidance. Scott Eddy, a hospitality influencer who happened to be on a cruise docked in Monaco when the Hondius story broke, said that fellow passengers had not even mentioned it. The average traveler understands, he said, that this is an isolated health situation and not something unique to cruise travel itself. These are not surprising quotes. What they are saying is that the customer base has, over years of repeat purchasing, already worked out where cruise-borne disease actually sits on the risk spectrum. To understand why their calibration is roughly correct, it helps to know about one piece of regulatory plumbing that the public mostly does not. The United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention requires cruise ships entering American ports to disclose when 3% or more of passengers or crew develop symptoms of certain illnesses. Most of the time, that rule fires for norovirus, the highly contagious stomach bug that thrives in any crowded indoor environment. It does not fire because cruise ships are unusually dirty. It fires because the rule exists for cruise ships and not for, say, hotels. Bob Levenstein, the Cruise Compete chief executive, made the arithmetic explicit. On a ship carrying 5,000 passengers, an outbreak affecting 3% of them works out to around 150 cases. That number triggers a federal disclosure. The disclosure makes the trade press. The trade press makes mainstream news. Meanwhile, in Levenstein's words, it goes completely unnoticed by the vast majority of vacationers, and experienced cruisers know this. What this means in practice is that the American public has, over the last 20 years, been exposed to a steady stream of news stories about disease outbreaks on cruise ships that were from the perspective of the people actually on those ships, not events. Hotel guests do not see this distortion because no equivalent disclosure rule applies to hotels. Cruise customers see it constantly. Over time, the experienced cruiser has learned that the news cycle around cruise illness is calibrated for the regulatory threshold, not for the actual lived experience of being on a cruise. This is what Rob Kortnick means when he uses the word Teflon. The headlines slide off, not because the audience is reckless or stupid, but because the audience has, through repeated personal experience, learned that the headlines are systematically louder than the reality. Levenstein's customer base has lived through 10 norovirus advisories, none of which affected their holiday. They have priced that asymmetry in. The Hondius story, of course, is not norovirus. The biology is genuinely different, genuinely more dangerous to the people who actually got it and worth taking seriously. Which brings us to the third reason demand is unchanged. The biology, on this one, is on the customer side. The third reason cruise demand is unchanged is the load-bearing one, and the one that is hardest to communicate in a 30-second news package. Hantavirus, on this specific ship, with this presumed strain, was never going to start a pandemic. The biology is structural. The biology is well characterized. The biology is the argument Dr. Bonnie Henry, British Columbia's senior health officer, was making this week when she told the press, in her exact words, "I want to emphasize that hantavirus is a very different virus than the other respiratory viruses that we've been dealing with, like COVID, like influenza, like measles, and it remains one that we do not consider to have pandemic potential." What does that actually mean? Three things have to be roughly true at once for a virus to have pandemic potential. First, it has to transmit efficiently between people through a route that scales, usually respiratory droplets or aerosols at a level you cannot avoid in normal life. Second, the serial interval, the time between one case and the next, has to be short enough to outrun the public health response. Third, the virus has to be able to circulate without depending on a specific animal reservoir, otherwise its geographic range is locked to wherever that animal happens to live. COVID-19 had all three. Influenza has all three. Measles has all three. Hantavirus fails on every one of them. Hantavirus is a rodent-borne RNA virus. Every known strain has a single rodent species as its natural host. In the United States, the deer mouse carries the strain called sin nombre. In Argentine Patagonia, a small rodent called the long-tailed pygmy rice rat carries the strain called Andes. The rodent is infected for life and never gets sick. It sheds virus continuously, in its urine, in its saliva, in its feces, into the dust of whatever environment it happens to live in. You catch hantavirus by breathing that dust, not from a rodent bite, not from skin contact, from inhaling aerosolized rodent waste in an enclosed, poorly ventilated space. Each year in the United States, around 30 people inhale enough hantavirus dust to develop a serious illness, and about 1 in 3 of those people dies. Of the roughly 30 hantavirus strains cataloged worldwide, only one, Andes, has ever been shown to transmit from person to person. Every other strain on the list is a one-way trip from rodent to human. The chain stops. Andes is different. In 1996, in El Bolson in Argentina, the first molecular evidence of human-to-human hantavirus transmission was documented by Paula Padula and her colleagues. In 2018 and 2019, in Epuyén in Argentine Patagonia, the largest documented person-to-person Andes cluster on record involved more than 30 confirmed cases, and Valeria Martinez and colleagues mapped the chain in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2020. This sounds, on first reading, like the opening of a pandemic story. It is the opposite. Every documented Andes person-to-person cluster has had a reproduction number, the average number of people each infected person passes the virus to, of roughly 1 or below. The Epuyén cluster, with superspreaders, with intimate household and healthcare contact, with weeks of transmission before anyone understood what was happening, was geographically contained inside a single town. Contact tracing closed the chain. The virus did not jump to Buenos Aires. It did not jump to Santiago. It did not get on an airplane. This is the structural argument. Andes needs prolonged close contact. The incubation period is 1 to 6 weeks, which gives public health systems time to catch up. And Andes depends on a South American rodent for its existence in the world. The Hondius is presumed to be carrying the Andes strain. Andes has been clustering in tight, contained groups for 30 years and has, in that time, never escaped a single town. The cruise consumer, intuitively or otherwise, has done a version of this calculation. The biology supports the calm. The fourth reason cruise demand is unchanged is the one that explains why the question even arises. The news cycle is doing rhetorical work that the bylined journalism is not. In February of 2020, a different cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, was quarantined for 2 weeks off Yokohama in Japan after a passenger tested positive for a novel coronavirus. Over the course of those 2 weeks, around 700 people aboard the ship were infected, 14 died, and the global news cycle ran continuous footage of masked passengers waving from balconies, of medical teams in protective gear walking up gangways, of helicopters lifting body bags off decks. That footage is now in the standing image bank of every major newsroom in the world. Andrew Coggins at Pace University made a quiet observation to the Associated Press that is worth pausing on. He said the hantavirus story got the attention it did, in part, because it reminded people of the Diamond Princess. That is not a metaphor. It is a statement about how news visuals work. When the words cruise ship and outbreak appear in the same headline, the producer's instinct is to reach for the footage they already have. The footage they already have is from the COVID era. And the footage they already have is doing rhetorical work that the bylined journalism is not actually doing. The bylined journalism, in this case, is mostly accurate. The Associated Press Wire piece names the disease correctly, quotes the right experts, and includes the booking data. The BBC quotes Bonnie Henry directly on pandemic potential. WBAL in Baltimore brings in Geeta Sood from the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. The reporting is, on the whole, calibrated. The distortion is in the package around the reporting. The headline, the chyron, the cutaway shot, the thumbnail. This is not a story about journalists getting the biology wrong. It is a story about how a news package can be technically accurate at the sentence level and rhetorically misleading at the package level. When a chyron reading Hantavirus Outbreak on cruise ship is running over footage of medics in hazmat suits boarding a quarantine vessel in 2020, the viewer is being given two different pieces of information at once. The text says Hantavirus. The visuals say pandemic. The biology supports the text. The visuals borrow their authority from a different virus. Experienced cruisers, the customer base of the cruise industry, have lived through this pattern. They have watched the cruise ship outbreak news package recur every couple of years since 2020, sometimes for norovirus, sometimes for Legionnaires, sometimes for COVID variants, and now for hantavirus. They have noticed that the footage gets recycled, that the chyron font is the same, that the helicopter shot keeps reappearing. They have learned by repeated exposure that the news framing is consistently calibrated for maximum alarm and that the underlying event is consistently smaller than the framing implies. This is the meta pattern Kortnick was describing when he used the word Teflon. The customer base has learned to read the framing as separate from the story. The general public, watching the same news package without that repeated context, is reading the framing as continuous with the story. The cruise consumer's calm is not denial, it is calibration. Which leaves one last question. The customer base, on this one, is acting as if the biology is on their side. The biology, on this one, actually is on their side. Is the calm rational, or is it just lucky? The 4 reasons cruise demand is unchanged, taken together. 1. The booking window closed before the news broke. 2. The customer base is overwhelmingly experienced cruisers who have learned what cruise-borne disease coverage actually looks like. 3. The biology of this particular virus does not support a pandemic story. 4. The news cycle is implying that it does only because the footage in the image bank is from a different virus. The honest version of the question this video opened with is whether those 4 reasons, stacked, justify the calm. The first 2 are about consumer behavior. The third is about the virus. The fourth is about how the story is being told. The 4 are not equally load-bearing. If only the first 2 were true, the calm would be a temporary illusion. The bookings made before the news would tick down once everyone caught up. Forward-looking demand would soften. The story would, eventually, dent the industry. That is not what the data is showing. Cruise Compete is up almost a third year on year. Viking is selling 27 cabins at 38% of capacity already. A Bank of America consumer survey cited in the Associated Press piece found that Gen Z and millennial respondents are the most likely demographic to say they intend to take a cruise in the next 12 months. None of that looks like the temporary inertia of pre-existing bookings working their way through the system. It looks like a customer base that is, on this question, making a real-time decision and not changing it. The customer base is right because the biology is right. Andes virus, even in its worst documented cluster, has never produced a reproduction number greater than roughly 1. It depends on a South American rodent. Its incubation period is long enough for public health to intervene. It has never escaped a single town. The Hondius outbreak is a serious local event with a high case fatality rate among the people who actually got it. It is not the start of anything global. Bonnie Henry said this out loud. The cruise consumer arrived at the same conclusion without saying it. There are a few specific things worth watching over the next 6 weeks that would change this reading if they changed first. The next ocean-wide expedition cruise is due to depart from Keflavik in Iceland on the 29th of May. Whether it sails as planned and at what booking load will be the first operational signal. The status of the 3rd Hondius death will move from presumptive to confirmed or be reclassified. Andes strain identification for the outbreak. If Oceanwide or the World Health Organization releases sequencing data, will close the last open biological question. And the longer-term booking data, the part Coggins flagged as the only place where impact might eventually show up, will arrive in next quarter's Cruise Lines International Association figures. If any of those signals turn negative, the picture changes. None of them have turned negative yet. The Keflavik cruise is still on the schedule. The booking data is still pointing up. The biology is still saying what Bonnie Henry said it was saying. The booking number is up almost a third. The biology says it is allowed to be. The footage is from a different virus.